everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to go over again how I personally manifest and how I also view manifesting, because I get a lot of questions about my process and like how I go about selecting the realities that I want. As you guys know at this point, I consider myself more of a reality selector than I do a manifester, but they're the same word. Don't like worry about the language. I'm actually going to eventually create a video on selecting your own language that best fits you. So this is just the language that I personally use. And not only are we going to go over how I manifest, but I also want to put some attention on this idea of detachment, because for me personally, the word detachment has never resonated with me. I do not like the idea of having to detach from my desire. And so this was definitely an area of struggle for me for a very long time, actually, with figuring out my own way of understanding this idea of detachment. Okay. And so if you're someone like me who's like, I do not like the word detachment, I don't like the idea of having to detach, I don't even know how to detach, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with how I personally detach, or the way I approach detachment in today's video. But without further ado, let's get straight into how I manifest and how I view manifesting. And I actually want to start off by saying that I do not follow any one teacher. In fact, my process is, first of all, unique to me in the language that I use and in the structure or in the way that I think about manifesting. I resonate with a lot of teachers when it comes to manifesting. I resonate with Neville Goddard. I resonate with Bashar, Abraham Hicks, Joseph Murray, even like Joe Dispenza or Richard Dotts, Frederick Dawson. I resonate with a lot of teachers that talk about manifesting. And if you notice, all of those teachers talk about manifesting from completely different perspectives. You know, we have Abraham Hicks talking about, selecting a better feeling thought is the way to go. And then you have, Neville Goddard telling you to saturate yourself with the state of the wish fulfilled. Joseph Murray telling you to impress your subconscious mind. Bashar's talking about changing your belief structures. It's a lot of information. And for me personally, when I was first starting off manifesting, I was a student of all of these teachers, but I felt very overwhelmed and I was on a mission to figure out the right way of manifesting. And so as I was on this quest for finding the right way to manifest, I ended up doing this thing that I like to call like process hopping. So I went through a phase of attempting to manifest via impressing my subconscious mind. Then I went through a phase of, robotic affirming and just focusing on thoughts rather than like feelings. I went through a phase where I was really into hypnosis and SATs and, Neville Goddard's way of thinking. I actually resonated a little bit more with Joseph Murray than I did Neville Goddard, but they both, make sense to me. But my whole point here is that as I was going through all of these different processes, what would end up happening was I would get caught on one process and I'd find that it was working, only to have it at some point stop working. And so once that process stopped working, I would hop to a different process. And then that process would start working for me until it didn't anymore. And then I would hop to the next. And so the problem that I found was not necessarily that the information did not resonate with me, but I never felt like I had a stable process that I could fully rely on 100% of the time. And looking back, I now see that it was simply because I lacked a certain level of self-awareness. Like, it wasn't these processes that was manifesting. It was actually my own levels of self-awareness and my own ways of manipulating myself in order to see a result in physical reality. And I don't really like to use the word manipulating. That's kind of a strong word, but that's the best word I can think of right now when it comes to why all of these processes work for me up to a certain point. And so what I ended up doing, and I actually recommend you do this as well, before I even share my process, is what I ended up doing was I went back and I basically reanalyzed all of these different processes that I followed, and I analyzed all the different patterns or commonalities between all of them, and I created my own system. In addition to that, I also went back and reanalyzed all of my successful manifestations and also my unsuccessful manifestations where I missed the mark. And this wasn't from a place of self-judgment. It was very much an analytical type of way I went about it. And so what I ended up doing, like I said, was I created my own process based off of the patterns that I found amongst all of these processes that I explored and tried. And so I want you to keep that in mind as I'm sharing my own personal process. I am not teaching one specific way of manifesting, and I'm not even teaching one specific teacher. I'm not teaching Neville Goddard. I'm not teaching Bashar. I'm not teaching Abraham Hicks. I'm not even teaching law of attraction or law of assumption. I am teaching you what I have personally become aware of within my own system and sharing it with you so that you can become more aware of these things within your own system so that you can become a more self-aware person, but also a more empowered person too, because you're not going to find your power in any process, even the process that I'm going to share in just a second. You're going to find your power in your own levels of self-awareness and how well you can align yourself to the reality that you want to experience or the reality that you want to select, no matter what process you do, no matter what permission slip you use. All right, so with that being said, let's get into my process. All right, now, as I mentioned, I consider myself a reality selector rather than a manifester, but I want to be very clear, they are the exact same thing. There is nothing different between manifesting, reality selecting, being a creator. It doesn't matter what terms you use. But the reason why I bring up the fact that I consider myself a reality selector is because I'm very specific and particular about the terminology I use. I'm going to eventually create a video on this, but I aim for language that makes me feel neutral, that makes me feel calm and chill. Because for me, neutrality is my power seat. Neutrality is very much associated with my God state. When I think of the word manifesting or creating, the way that my brain associates those words is very much action based. And I'm not saying action is bad or not bad, but what I have noticed within myself is that I tend to sometimes accidentally take over the role of what the universe's job is. For me, manifesting is very much just learning how to exert my own free will off of what I prefer, what I want to experience, and then getting out of my own way, letting the universe give it to me, basically. So I pick what I want in my mind and I align with it appropriately. And then essentially the universe or my higher self or whatever you want to call it will come in and deliver it to me. It will show the reflection to me, what I've picked in my imagination. But I like the term reality selector because for me, it helps remind me that all I'm doing is picking what I want and then getting out of the way. That's all I have to do. That's all my linear mind has to do. My higher mind will take care of the rest. God, the universe, will take care of the rest because that's how I view manifesting. All right. And so the way that I go about reality selecting or selecting the realities that I want to experience is I see my inner being, my sense of self, my state of being, my vibrational essence, whatever you want to call it, as a four knob system. So basically, I dictate my state of being and therefore my reality with these four knobs. Because as we know, our goal is to never change physical reality. Our goal is to change ourselves. And the way that I like to see manifesting is I tend to use more quantum physics terminology. So I like to think of me changing my position to reality using my mind. But my whole point with this is that my four knob system is the way that I control my state of being, my vibrational essence, my alignment to what I want. All right. So my four knobs are the selection knob, the belief knob, the detachment knob, and the integration knob, or handling the 3D knob. And I talk a lot about this in my How to Manifest Exactly What You Want video. I'll link it somewhere above. But basically, the way that I turn these knobs within my system is basically just becoming aware of what it feels like to not be aligned versus what it feels like to be aligned within these knobs. Now, okay, I'm going to clip this microphone to my, can I clip it to my hair? I see some people clip microphones to their hair. If I clip, so I actually recorded a video with this microphone, having it clipped to my collar, but it was all muffled and annoying. So I am going to clip it to my hair and hope for the best. Oh God, please work. I should probably play on this. We're going to clip it to my hair. Thank God I wore my hair down today. I think it worked. Oh Lord, I don't want to have to record this again. I took away the microphone on top of my camera because you kept seeing a shadow every time I would show these pictures, so I didn't like that. Like, oh, I'll just buy one of the ones you hold. Not a smart idea when you need both hands to show a diagram. Hold up. We're going to braid this. Okay. Things you do for a video. This is what my four knob system looks like. All right, so as I mentioned, I have my four knobs here. We have the selection knob, we have the belief knob, we have the detachment knob, and we have the integration knob. All right, now the way that I turn these knobs within my system is I'm very much aware of what it feels like to be on the cold version or the unfavorable version of the knob versus the hot version or the favorable version of the knob. When it comes to my selection knob, I will check within my system, am I on the cold setting or the hot setting? Am I focusing on what I don't want or what I do want? And more specifically, am I focusing on having what I want rather than focusing on not having what I want? The selection knob is all about basically picking the reality that you want to experience. So it's becoming clear with what you find as favorable versus unfavorable. So this is where you are saying your affirmations, where you're doing your imaginal acts, where you are revising, where you're scripting. I even categorize belief structure change underneath the category of selecting, which is different than the belief levels of impossibility versus possibility. I'm eventually going to create a video on this, but let's say that I want to change an unfavorable belief structure. Like, let's say that I've identified the belief that people don't treat me with respect. And I want to start seeing evidence of people treating me with respect and start integrating that belief structure into my reality. I put that underneath my selection knob. All right. I'm not going to go too much in depth with this, but I do want to make a point of this because it is different from my perspective in comparison to the belief levels or the belief knob. But basically, after the selection knob, we have our belief knob, which is just clarifying that this thing that I want to experience is possible for me. My belief knob focuses on levels of belief. I've already created a video on how to basically turn your belief knob if you don't believe that your manifestation is possible. So I'm not going to go into too much depth with it here, but basically I make sure I am turning my knob from impossibility to possibility. So after I have selected the reality I want to experience by focusing on having it already in my imagination, I ask myself, I'll come out of that imaginal act and I'll be like, okay, do I believe that this is possible for me? Even though I personally do believe that literally anything is possible, sometimes when I am selecting the reality that I want to experience, sometimes I actually am accidentally perceiving that reality from an impossibility standpoint. And so what I always double check is I come out of whatever I'm envisioning or selecting, and I always re-remind myself, yes, I do believe this is possible for me. If there's ever a point where I don't believe that something is possible for me, or if I am not fully on board with this thing that I want to experience as being something likely to happen, I will create my own possibility trails to basically create a knowing of this desire. Like I said, I go over it more in the video I created about belief, so I'm not going to go into too much depth with it here, but that's how I turn my belief knob, all right? And I know what it feels like to perceive something as impossible versus possible. In fact, you're actually going to notice that the cold version of each of these knobs does not feel good, but the hot version of these knobs does feel good. And that's your indicator to know if your knob has been turned or not, is if you are in a state of being of unfavorability versus favorability. And so the third knob is detachment, and that's what I'm going to be talking more about in today's video. But basically, this is turning the knob from needing or perceiving the lack still to basically one of these categories. And there's actually a lot of ways you can detach, a lot of ways that I found that some people don't talk about. I'm going to go over more of this in today's video, but that's my third knob. My last knob is integration. So this is where I basically double check, am I rejecting 3D reality or am I accepting and allowing 3D reality and practicing, concepts like circumstances don't matter. Everything in our reality is fundamentally neutral, that kind of thing. My fourth knob is basically learning how to integrate myself back into physical reality and learning how to move through it to the reality that I do want to experience. And as you're going to see in today's video, these two knobs are very much dependent on each other. In fact, the more detached I am from my desire, the more I feel like I can effectively integrate myself back into 3D reality. But just to reiterate, I really like to see manifesting as a knob system because sometimes, or at least for me in the past, what I would end up accidentally doing is becoming too dependent on the process. And I'd find myself being like, I'm doing all these steps correctly. Why is this not working? And the reason why it wasn't working is because I was more focused on something external for me rather than focusing on my own internal alignment. All right. And so my biggest recommendation when it comes to any process, whether you decide to use or think about manifesting the way that I do, or if you follow someone like Neville Goddard, make it your mission to use the teacher as a way of becoming more self-aware, and make sure that you're not self-judging yourself. Make sure that you are self-reflecting or self-analyzing. All right. self-reflecting and self-analyzing does not have a filter of insecurity or fear around it, meaning that you're going to feel at the very least indifferent, if not better, once you realize and become more aware of your own alignment to whatever it is you want. But before I get more into the detachment part of today's video, I do want to point out that this is how my mind actually sees these knobs. So when I am selecting a reality, the first three knobs are within my mental reality. This is where I'm doing the reality selection process. And actually, another thing to point out with my own personal process, I see realities as circles because from my perspective, we have access to infinite number of realities, which is kind of overwhelming when you think about it. And so what I do to sort of define the reality before it appears in my physical reality is I like to see the reality that I'm selecting as a circle. I'm going to create a video on this as well, but basically each reality is a circle, and within each reality is a state of being circled around a belief structure. That's how I personally see realities. In fact, all realities are just different states of consciousness. All realities are different states of being. Different levels of consciousness are indicated by different states of being. So being aware of your state of being is going to help you become more aware, not only of yourself, but also of the realities that you want to select. And so the point I want to make here is that you're going to see a lot of circles within my system and within my channel because a circle to me indicates a reality. So this whole circle right here is a reality indicated by my state of being that is basically very consciously aligned with these three knobs. My last knob is more of physical reality knob. So this is me becoming very aware of how I'm interacting with my physical reality because when I detach effectively, I am now in a different position in my physical reality, even if my physical reality looks exactly the same. And basically, just to wrap this up, the way that I persist is by going back and forth between these two. My mental reality, my physical reality. Making sure that I am always reselecting the reality I do prefer no matter what happens in physical reality. But with that being said, I want to talk a little bit more about this detachment knob because like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not a big fan of the word detachment. Now, there's nothing wrong with the word detachment. There's nothing wrong with the words let it go. It's just for me, I'm very much aware of how I perceive things just based off of my state of being. And every time I go about turning the knob of detachment or even saying the word detachment, I have this feeling, almost like this fear-based feeling come up. And like I said, it's not because this word is wrong or negative or anything like that, but it does evoke a certain level of fear in me, especially after I've come out of a reality selection process in my imagination and I come out of it and I'm like, all right, now don't want it, don't need it anymore. That's kind of how my brain interprets the word detachment, even though I know that that's not necessarily what detachment is. And so in today's video, I want to offer a different way of thinking about detachment and more specifically how I turn this knob within my system to change my state of being. So I'm going to put this thing back on my hair and hopefully it continues to work and stay put. Testing. All right, we're good. All right, so this next diagram that I'm going to show you is the exact same one of the last one I showed you. All right, it does look a little bit different, but it's only because I fleshed it out a little bit more to make a point that I want to share with detachment. Okay, so the diagram looks like this. All right. So here we have selecting the reality we want to experience, and here we have integrating back into our physical reality. All right, like I mentioned in the last diagram, my first three knobs are in this reality. My fourth knob is in current reality, or my present moment, or my 3D reality. All right, but like I said, it looks a little bit different, first of all, because these circles look more like squares, but also because if you notice, I have these like an explanation for the detachment knob to help better illustrate how I go from detaching to integrating back into my physical reality. All right. And I actually want to start off explaining this diagram by pointing out that there's actually a pre-step in the manifestation process before you even reality select. And that pre-step is actually when you receive your desire. So I'm going to get to why I added this in here in the first place, but I want to explain a little bit more what I mean by this. When we first receive a desire, whatever it is, it's actually from the perspective of lack. There isn't anything wrong with perceiving lack, because if you cannot perceive lack, then you don't have a desire. The reason why this is important to point out is because this is actually the fundamental pre-step that every single person goes through when they go about any type of manifestation process. It's the actual receiving of your desire. Desire is built from contrast or perception of contrast. So let's say, for example, I'm going about my reality. I look at my hand and I'm like, I don't see a cupcake here. And I'm like, I would like a cupcake. I am perceiving lack of a cupcake right now. It is at this point in my manifestation process, whatever it is, that my desire is born. It's when I notice the absence of something. Now, I do want to point out that technically there isn't any lack here. I mean, I have maybe an abundance of air or an abundance of space, right? We're never ever really lacking anything. But the point I want to make here is that our perception of lack is the very thing that gives us our desire. We wouldn't have a desire if we didn't perceive lack in some way. So there's nothing wrong with lack because it's just simply the first step of the process or the first pre-step of the process, all right? So getting back to the diagram, like I said, we started off with our pre-step where we receive our desire, where we start perceiving lack of something, right? Once we perceive lack of something, that's when we start selecting a new reality, whatever it is, okay? So this is where you first realize okay, I'm perceiving lack. What do I want? What do I want to fill the space with? What do I want to experience? After you understand what you want to experience or what you want to manifest, that's when you select it in your head. And that's where all the processes come in. Revision, imaginal acts, affirmations, etc. All right? In fact, let's back up and let's use an example to walk through this process to see what it looks like to go through the reality selection process. So let's say that, and let's use an SP example. Let's say that your SP is a guy. And let's say you have an experience where you go to a restaurant with your guy and you notice another couple sitting away from you. And you notice them, they eat their meal, they get up and they go to leave. And you notice that the guy holds the door open for the woman. And in that moment, you realize that your guy does not do that for you. In fact, it actually triggers you to think about all the times he did not open the door for you and that he's never been really this person who's opened the door for you. And so in that experience, you actually received your desire because you noticed the lack of it within your own life, within your own reality, simply by observing a couple do it like out in the wild. This isn't the only way you can receive your desire. Sometimes receiving a desire can come from watching like social media reels. Receiving a desire can come from just considering something, or in this case, just noticing that your husband or partner does not open the door for you. It doesn't really matter how you receive your desire, but it is important to point out that at some point you will perceive a version of lack, and that's actually how you start the process of manifesting. So in this particular example, you notice the lack within your own reality when you watched or perceived a different couple go through a series of motions in public, basically. Now, it's also important to point out that there's a lot of people who actually get stuck in this step, this pre-step, where they realize and they notice lack, but they stay in this lack mindset or this lack reality simply because they actually don't know how to get out of it. But as conscious creators, what we're learning how to do is basically notice that lack reality and go through our own reality selection process, change ourselves, change our state of being, change our inner reality so that it can be reflected onto the screen of space, what we do prefer, right? And so in this example, when you notice that, hey, that guy over there opened the door for his wife, and I realized that my guy does not open the door for me, you noticed your own version of lack in this subject of life. But being the conscious creator that you are, you know that you can select a different version of your own SP. And so basically, that's when you start the whole entire process of reality selection or manifesting, however you want to say it, right? So the first thing we do here is realize what we want. So in this case, you realize, hey, you know what? I would like it for my SP to start holding the doors open for me and consistently, right? I want to select the version of him that holds the door open for me when we enter into restaurants or when we get in the car, wherever there's a door. So after you realize what you want, then you actually select the reality that you want to experience, which this is where you actively use your imagination, right? So you could use an inner conversation, you could use an imaginal act, you can use scripting, you can even use revision. For the sake of this example, though, we're going to use an imaginal act, all right? So let's say that you select in your mind the imaginal act of you going to a restaurant and you see your SP opening the door for you and you turn around and you say, thank you. And so this imaginal act implies that you have now successfully selected this version of your SP who holds doors open for you. So you're currently in your imagination at this point, right? And after you've selected that reality in your imagination, you come out of it and you're like, yes, this is what I want. I want to have this version of my SP showing up for me in my physical reality consistently, right? So at this very moment, you have now just turned your selection knob from don't want, which is your SP not opening doors for you, to what you do want, your SP opening up doors for you. One thing I want to point out here is that when you turn the knob within your system, you're going to notice that you feel at the very least better. You don't always have to feel like happy or excited or an extreme emotion, but at the very least, you want to feel a sense of relief or a sense of indifference. That's all you're ever really aiming for. Because if you think about it, all of the things that you want naturally feel better when you get them because you want them. And you, as you're perceiving lack, you're not in a favorable state of being because you're perceiving lack, right? When you have the fulfillment of your desire, at the very least, you're going to feel a little bit better, right? So as we know, inner creates outer. So as you turn this knob, you want to be aware within your system if you feel better. If you feel better, then your knob has successfully turned in that category. So after we've selected our reality in our imagination, we go down to our belief level, right? So as I mentioned before, I have a whole other video about belief levels, but basically all you want to do for belief levels is turn the knob from impossibility to possibility. So getting back to our example, that imaginal act that we selected for the different version of your SP, when you come out of that imaginal act, what you want to do is remind yourself, yes, I do believe that this is possible for me. Now, as I keep saying, I mentioned this in my belief video on how to create a knowing of your desire, but if for some reason you don't believe that your desire is possible for you, I would make the argument that you do, you just haven't identified how you think it's possible. The way I talk about this is creating possibility trails where you take information that already resonates with you and you use it to basically convince yourself of the possibility. Or in other words, shift your knob from this desire is impossible to this desire is possible for me to experience in physical reality. Even if it's a very far out desire, you can always start with more esoteric pieces of information that resonate for you. For me personally, I always start off with, yes, I believe that this is possible for me because I live in an infinite universe and I believe that I have access to all infinite potentials in this exact moment. That's a rationale that I use. That's actually the start of my possibility trail in a lot of my manifestations, especially manifestations where I'm like, I have absolutely no idea how this is going to happen, but I do know it's possible and this is why I believe it's possible. So my point for this knob is just use the information that resonates for you the most and that makes you feel that your desire is on some level possible for you. So after we've turned our belief knob, that's when we start looking at our detachment knob. Detachment, as I keep saying, is not my favorite word to use. I like to think about the detachment knob as a level of security knob, all right? And I want to talk a little bit more about how I rationalize detachment so that if you're someone who's just not a fan of the word or doesn't like the idea of letting go of your desire or can't seem to let go of your desire, this may help you. It's definitely helped me. Detachment is all about releasing the lack aspect that you started off with at the beginning of your manifestation journey, all right? So when you are reality selecting, and it doesn't matter how you're reality selecting, it doesn't matter if you're doing sats, it doesn't matter if you are doing more Neville Goddard style manifesting or if you're doing affirmations, does not matter. But after you turn the belief knob, what you're doing next is more like double checking to make sure that you are not back in your pre-step of receiving your desire or basically just perceiving lack. Because remember, inner creates outer. The whole point of manifesting is to change your inner state of being, of having your desire, so that it can reflect in physical reality. And for me personally, the way that I like to think of detachment is I like to think of it as my level of security when it comes to my manifestation. Because attachment is a very insecure feeling. The way that I see detachment is kind of like a spectrum where you can feel like you need something like right now because you have a survival instinct in you that's being activated and creating a massive fear-based response to you are in your God state and you already have everything you could ever want. But the point I want to make here is that any level of need or insecurity you have about your desire when you come out of your reality selection process is actually a form of attachment, or vibrationally speaking, not having. And so things to be aware of when it comes to the cold version of this knob or the unfavorable version of this knob is if you feel any type of need within your system, any type of insecurity within your system, or any type of perception of lack within your system, what you're actually doing when you come out of your visualization or your imaginal act or however you're using your imagination, what you're doing is actually going back to the step where you have received your desire. And we don't want that, right? We're past this step already. Our goal is to take this knob, this cold version of our knob, and turn it into one of these many different ways you can actually start detaching from your desire. So the way I can tell if I'm in my detachment is if I'm in preference mode, which is a very light feeling of desire. It's less grippy. Another feeling of detachment is a very secure feeling. You feel relaxed. You feel at the very least relief. One of my favorite ways of detaching is actually through the state of being of resolve, which I'm going to explain in just a second, because a lot of my reality selection, the way I detach is actually by making a decision. And so when you make a decision, the state of being that comes after you've made a decision is resolve. But I have found that's also a form of detachment. And another form of detachment is just living in the end. Now, I want to point this out as well. This might be controversial, but I don't always go about the manifestation process the same way for all of my manifestations, because I do see manifesting and the manifestations I go for as bigger manifestations versus smaller manifestations. Now, I'm fully aware of the information that says, it's just as easy to manifest a penny versus $1 trillion when it comes to manifesting. And more specifically, like, the universe doesn't necessarily care what you want. And for the record, I do agree with that information. I do agree that when it comes to wanting your desire, it's no harder to manifest a penny than it is $1 trillion. But with that being said, when I am perceiving lack of $1 trillion versus lack of a penny, those are two very different sensations within my system. And for me personally, one feels further away just because, to me, from where I'm sitting at this precise given moment in my reality, it's more believable for me to manifest a penny like in a second if I want to. I could probably find a penny somewhere in my room. But me manifesting $1 trillion in the same day, it just appears and seems more far out, further away from me is how I like to think about it. Now, that's not to say that $1 trillion really is far away from me, but it's how I'm perceiving it at this moment. So I personally treat detachment of my desires differently depending on the size that I am perceiving them in that moment. And so for those smaller manifestations, or the manifestations where I see them as smaller, even though I'm fully aware of the fact that manifesting a penny is the same as manifesting $1 trillion, I'm fully aware of that. It doesn't necessarily help me when it comes to manifesting, unless I'm using it as a possibility trail or a way to rationalize and make the manifestation easier, which you can totally still do if you want to. But the point I want to make here is that I handle smaller manifestations and bigger manifestations differently when it comes to detachment. So for smaller manifestations, like manifesting a piece of gum, for instance, let's say that I'm manifesting a pack of gum or a piece of gum. That's a pretty small manifestation. The level of contrast between this reality where I'm lacking gum and the reality where I have a piece of gum in my hand is very small. At least it seems that way to my linear mind. So because the level of contrast between this reality where I lack the gum and the reality where I have the gum is so small, all I aim for when it comes to detachment is neutrality. Because getting a piece of gum is not going to drastically change my life, or at least I don't perceive it as doing so. And so it's easier for me to adopt a level of indifference towards this, or a level of neutrality, simply because I am perceiving it as a smaller manifestation. There is less contrast between the two realities. But let's get back to the original example. Let's say that I'm manifesting a different version of my SP, and I've never experienced this version of them before. I've never experienced the version of them where they hold doors for me on a consistent basis. Even though holding doors may not really seem like a big deal to some people, because I want that reality, because I want that version of my SP, and I haven't experienced it before, it naturally may seem bigger, especially if I'm attached to this SP. Some manifestations you may perceive as like big manifestations, but other people may see as like smaller manifestations. So like for someone who has grown up maybe in an environment where, men always hold the door open for them, getting your SP or selecting the version of your SP that opens the door for you may seem like a minor manifestation. But to you, maybe because you've never experienced that before, it may feel like a bigger manifestation. It's really up to the individual and how they're perceiving the situation, and more specifically, perceiving the desire that they want. But let's just say that you're someone who you've never really experienced men holding the door open for you in general, or more specifically, your man holding the door open for you ever. And so the way that you're perceiving this particular manifestation is more like bigger, because it seems less believable, and the level of contrast between the reality where he does not hold the door open for you versus the reality where he consistently always holds the door open for you just seems more like a stretch. Like there's more contrast between the two realities. It's going to naturally feel like a bigger manifestation. All right. But let's say that you are perceiving it as a bigger manifestation. That's totally okay. The way that I go about bigger manifestations, I like to aim for the state of being of resolve. So I like to turn my detachment knob from that level of insecurity or that level of need to the secure feeling of resolve. So after I've gotten clear on what I actually want, so like in this case, I want my SP to hold open doors for me on a consistent basis. I want to select that version of them. Yes, I do believe it's possible. After I get very clear on these two, I naturally feel better. Like I said, when you turn your knobs, you're going to feel naturally better. Your state of being is going to start to change. And that's the point. My third knob of detachment is then deciding, yes, that is what I want. I actually do want this. And yes, I do believe that this is possible for me. When those knobs are turned and I have made the decision and basically restated that this is what I want and I believe it's possible for me, the way that I know I have made the decision is if I have the state of being of resolve after the fact. The reason why I like the state of being of resolve so much is because what I have found is that with my bigger manifestations, when I actually select the reality that I want and I believe in its possibility, I can have limiting beliefs and I can have, fears. I can have other, resistance come up within my consciousness. But because I have made the decision and fully aligned in the reality that I've selected and in the belief levels, it's almost like they don't even matter because I'm actually clear on what I want and I do believe that it is possible for me. For those smaller manifestations, like the piece of gum, for example, because the difference in contrast is not as severe, it's easier for me to just aim for indifference. The point I want to make when it comes to detachment is that if you're someone who doesn't like the idea of, not needing your manifestation or letting it go, think of it as when you come out of your reality selection process, the only goal you're aiming for after you've selected it and believe that it's possible for you, your only goal is to not get back to the pre-step of basically perceiving lack. Your goal with any type of manifestation process is to feel a certain level of security. And it does not matter how you find that level of security. If you're someone who likes affirmations or robotic affirmations, you can find security in the fact that you will always have the power to say the affirmation or the string of words. That's what I realized did the job for me when I was practicing robotic affirming. I found a certain level of self-soothing security in the fact that I could say the words. It was like my anchor. Like, no matter what was happening in my physical reality, I could always say that string of words. And that string of words to me meant that I was doing things correctly. So that's where my level of security came from. That's where my detachment came from. If you're someone who follows more Neville Goddard style type of teaching, where he talks about SATs or living in the state of the wish fulfilled, if you have selected the reality where you already have your manifestation and you believe in the rationale that Neville Goddard uses, where feeling is the secret, your level of security or your level of detachment could come from the fact that you can actually feel your manifestation in your imagination in a consistent way. And because you're so confident and self-secure in your imagination, you don't necessarily need anything in physical reality. If you find security in just feeling better when it comes to any type of situation you may experience in physical reality, that can be your form of detachment as well. It does not matter how you get to that secure feeling in relationship to your desire, but it is important that you get there, because if you don't and you do come out of your reality selection process, whatever it is, and you start feeling like you need your manifestation or you feel really insecure about your manifestation or you're, perceiving lack of it, what you're accidentally doing is going back up to step one rather than successfully integrating back into your physical reality. Physical reality will change once you have selected your manifestation, but you want to make sure that you're going this way rather than this way when you pick the reality that you want to experience. Now, I do want to make a quick point when it comes to integrating back into physical reality. Let's say that you successfully turn your knob from need or insecurity or perceiving lack to preference or indifference or resolve or living in the end, or any type of secure feeling in relationship to what you have selected. what you're going to notice is that when you turn this knob to a more secure feeling, you're going to feel like you can go back to your physical reality because you're now going back to your physical reality differently. And that's the important point to make, is that when it comes to manifesting, that's the point of using our imagination, is to go back to physical reality as a different person with a different state of being, with a different level of clarity, belief, and security around what we want. And the more secure you feel in your manifestation, the easier it is to integrate back into physical reality differently in a more favorable way. This process right here is all about learning how to change your state of being. This process right here is learning about how to handle physical reality as you are going across the bridge that's inevitably going to lead you to your manifestation. And so the way that I like to think about persisting is basically going back and forth between these two bubbles, these two realities, until you manifest what you want, or until you materialize what you want onto the screen of space. And so I want to wrap this up by talking about how to handle your 3D reality more specifically after you have integrated back into physical reality. So let's get back to the original example where you're manifesting the version of your SP holding doors open for you consistently. And let's say that you have turned all of the knobs successfully. So what you end up doing is you exit out of this reality selection process with an elevated or favorable state of being. You're aligned with what you want, you believe it's possible for you, and you have a feeling of security around your manifestation. So you're like, okay, I'm going to go back into physical reality and I'm going to persist in physical reality until it materializes onto the screen of space. What I like to do when it comes to handling my physical realities, I like to have a game plan for how I'm going to handle what I think might come up in physical reality. It doesn't have to, but sometimes we do have fears that almost hold us back when it comes to what we think we might experience in physical reality and what it means. So, for example, things that could happen in physical reality. I could perceive lack again. So let's say that I'm back at a restaurant and my SP doesn't hold the door open for me, and I notice yet another couple where the guy holds the door open for the girl. And I am reminded of the fact that I have not experienced that yet in physical reality. That's me re-perceiving lack again. That's when I will go back and redo this process again. Now, when you start persisting more and more, what it's going to feel like is basically just re-reminding yourself of what you already know, or re-reminding yourself of what you already want. But let's say in that experience where you're again re-reminded of the lack in your physical reality, let's say that it triggers you and a bunch of emotions come up and you kind of have this like emotional reaction, right? The emotional reaction is not bad. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to, get angry, get angry. The best piece of advice I can give you is after the emotional reaction is done, calm yourself down, recenter yourself, remind yourself, I am God of my reality. I am awareness. I am operant power. And then remind yourself of what you already know to be true, what you've already selected in your imagination. Oh, I see my man holding the door open for me consistently, and he's very happy about it. Come out of that, remind yourself, yes, I do believe that this is possible for me to experience, and then find your level of security with that manifestation. Whether you simply decide that, yes, I want this, and yes, I do believe it's possible for me. I may not know how it's going to happen, but I do believe that it's possible for me. Return your knob of attachment to a level of security and then reintegrate back into physical reality. It's actually important to note as well that sometimes you may be triggered by your 3D reality, like the example I just gave. What you may also find within that reaction you had, especially if it's a strong, unfavorable reaction you have to that situation, is that you may find a belief structure that is unfavorable for you for the reality that you are currently selecting. And that's when you would want to start focusing on changing the belief structure by basically doing the exact same process. So your belief structures are basically the shell around the reality. They basically dictate how you experience reality. So the point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes when you go through this process of persisting, it's not only about reselecting what you want. Sometimes you may identify a limiting or an unfavorable belief structure that is misaligned with the reality that you are selecting for. Not always, but it can happen. I've had it happen for me, so I'm just saying it to make you more aware of it as well. Like I said, I'm eventually going to create a video on belief structures versus belief levels. Just understand that belief structures are very much how you experience physical reality. And the way that you can change belief structures is basically by using your own manifestation process, or in this case, I like to use my own reality selection process. I put it through the system, just like I would any other manifestation. But I want to wrap this video up by adding in a couple other ways you can start to learn how to handle 3D reality better. So we already mentioned, re-perceiving the lack again. or noticing that your SP has not maybe shown up in a favorable way, or you're reminded of the reality that you're currently in, where you have not experienced your SP holding the door open for you. We've also talked about being triggered emotionally, right? And how we can handle that. Sometimes other ways that we can become misaligned by accident as we're living physical reality is by simply becoming aware of the lack within our own mind, or when we become aware of the manifestation in our own mind and our perception of where reality is at this moment. So let's say that it's been like a week and your SP still hasn't reflected back that they are the new version of themselves. They haven't, held the door open for you, not even once yet. And so as you're, thinking about things, you realize that it's been an entire week and your SP still has not opened the door for you. This is all happening in your own mind. Sometimes that can also trigger you to go back to the old state of being. So it's at that point where you want to become re-aware of the fact that you're perceiving lack even in your own mind and go through the reality selection process again. Use that experience to basically return your knobs back to your favorable state of being of already having your manifestation. Sometimes what can happen is we receive a partial manifestation or birds before land. And sometimes that can also trigger us depending on how secure we feel with our manifestation. And sometimes we can experience a form of contrast or an echo, where reality either shows up yet again the same way that it has been, or we receive something that is basically opposite of our manifestation. And obviously, neither of these are favorable, but it's very important to become aware of the fact that it's just an echo or it's just a piece of contrast. It's not about what's happening in physical reality, it's about how you are showing up in physical reality. What you're going to notice is that when those 3 knobs are turned within your system, you're going to feel a very strong sense of clarity and security, and even sometimes just relief. So if you have a piece of contrast or an unfavorable experience come up in physical reality in relationship to your manifestation, if you have the experience of seeing that level of contrast and not really being affected by it, you can be very much assured that you are very much in alignment with having your manifestation. It's only a matter of time until it is actually reflected onto the screen of space, until it is materialized in physical reality. So if your man does not hold the door open for you and you don't react to it, or you don't necessarily let it affect your knobs of what you've selected, what you believe is possible for you, or your levels of security with what you want to experience, then it really is only a matter of time until it materializes, because it's at that point where you are reflecting a new version of you despite whatever is being shown to you in physical reality. That is where your power lies. That is how you actually change reality indirectly. As I mentioned in a lot of my videos, I always start from my God state of being, which is a very neutral, very indifferent, very observation-based state of being. And what I have found is that getting back to this state of being is a power move. It's very much a seat of power where I know and I can actually feel that anything is possible. I talk more about how to get into your God state of being, so I won't go too much in depth with it here, but I do get a lot of questions about, what if I mess up? What if I do react to my physical reality? How do I handle emotional reactions? Or how do I know what to do next? How do I know which knob to turn or which one is misaligned if I'm feeling off or if I'm feeling that my state of being is off? My answer to this, and this is something that I do myself, it is a rule that I always follow and it has never steered me wrong. The first goal in any manifestation process is to learn how to chill out. It's learning how to calm down. It's learning how to, at the very least, self-soothe. It's not about repressing emotions. It's about learning how to regain your seat of power. And the fastest way to regain your seat of power is by learning how to chill out. It does not matter how you do it. It doesn't matter if you are someone who likes to do breathing exercises. It doesn't matter if you're someone who likes to go on a walk. It doesn't matter if you're someone who likes to remove yourself from the situation. It doesn't matter if you use affirmations or maybe even watch manifesting videos. Sometimes that actually is a really nice form of self-soothing because you actually have someone telling you, things you already know, kind of reminding you of your power. And so it makes you feel a lot more calm and relaxed and less reactive to physical reality. There are an infinite number of ways of learning how to chill out. But I want to leave you with this. If you take anything away from this video, the number one skill set that's going to lead you straight to your power, the number one skill set that's going to lead you to more alignment with what you want, more situational awareness, more self-awareness, the number one skill set is learning how to chill out. The way that I like to practice chilling out is I'm very much aware of unfavorable states of being. I don't necessarily obsess about the knobs or what knob needs to be turned in a given moment, whenever I'm in a small or slight unfavorable state of being, what I like to do is I like to back up, see that state of being as a reality. It doesn't necessarily get rid of the feeling, but I like to back up and see what I'm experiencing from a more detached perspective. And when I find my levels of detachment or my levels of self assurance, or I'm sitting more in my God state, in different state, observation based state of being, and I have that level of security within my system, that's when I can go and pivot to the reality that I do want, or persist again in the reality that I do want, reselect the reality that I do want. If I'm having an extreme emotional reaction in that moment, and I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm having an extreme emotional reaction in that moment, I will do anything to calm down. Sometimes I will leave the situation. Sometimes I will breathe myself back into my God state of being. I don't follow a particular breathing exercise or ritual. I tend to obsess about, very specific steps sometimes. So I've seen a lot of videos about, breathing exercises and counting back from 10 and going slower, but sometimes that actually works me back up. So all I do is I know I'm very much aware of what it feels like to be in my God state of being. I know what it feels like to be in a neutral state of being, an indifferent state of being. And so I know that all I have to do is realize that I'm not having a good time right now. I'm having a very unfavorable reaction. I'm in an unfavorable state of being. And the second I start feeling that, that's when I start breathing myself back to my God state. Like I said, once I'm in my God state, once I'm in a very secure state of indifference, that's when I can pivot and pick the reality that I want. But I have found, especially looking at my past manifestations and the way that I would used to go about manifesting, the way I used to handle it was I would kind of like freak out that I was in this unfavorable state of being and then think like, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything wrong and this is bad because it means that I'm not in my favorable state of being. And then if I'm not in my favorable state of being, then I'm not going to get what I want. And I would just basically spiral from that state of being. Or I would realize that I'm in an unfavorable state of being and try to change the state of being from the exact same state of being that started it. And so it would just perpetuate the state of being until I exhausted myself out. So I've now learned that it's a lot faster if you learn how to breathe out of it and kind of just see it. And again, calm yourself down, chill out, relax, have that be your number one step, no matter what's happening in physical reality, and then turn, then pivot, then select the reality that you want to experience. All right. Now, I know this was a pretty in-depth video, but I do hope that it clarified a lot of the questions that I get on my YouTube channel. This is how I go about manifesting my reality selection process. And although this is a pretty long video, but honestly, the process itself is pretty quick for me, especially when it comes to like everyday manifesting and even, my bigger manifestations as well. The reason why this is so long is just because I really took time to like explain each step in depth and more specifically flesh out this idea of what detachment is. But I do want to make it very clear that when I pick the realities that I want to experience, it's usually just like, hey, I want my SP to show up this way. Yeah, I do believe it's possible for me. And I truly feel like this is possible for me because I believe in very esoteric things. So my possibility trails are very much like within the manifestation rationale of things. The infinite universe, when creation is finished, I'm selecting a completely new version of this person. I'm going to a completely different earth with this version of my person in it. I use those belief structures that already resonate with me to create the possibility trail that make me think like, duh, this is going to happen. It's the most obvious thing in the world because this is true because I resonate with it. So, and then detachment is just finding a level of security. Like I said, for me, my two favorite ones are aiming for indifference or aiming for the state of being of resolve. But there are two main points I want to drive home when it comes to this video. The first is that no matter what process you use, whether it's the one I just shared or if you follow more Neville Goddard, Bashar, Abraham Hicks, whatever, make sure that you're using whatever process to change yourself. And what I mean by change yourself is change your state of being from lack of not having your manifestation to having your manifestation. The second thing I want to leave you with is when it comes to detachment, if you don't like the word detachment, think of it as a feeling of security around your manifestation. Find a level of security that you can hold on to when it comes to using your imagination as you navigate physical reality. And actually, there's a third thing I want to leave you with, and that is the number one skill set to master is learning how to chill out. I promise you, you won't regret learning how to chill out. I can't even put it into words right now how learning how to chill out has accelerated my manifesting and how it's made me more of a self-aware person. It does not matter how you do it. but learn how to regulate yourself. Learn how to take control back and learn how to get back into your God state of being, your power seat, your state of indifference, where you already have everything you want, where you know that you're God of your reality and you can have anything that you can conceive of in your mind, okay? But the fastest way to your neutral, indifferent God state of being, your observation based state of being, is learning how to calm down. It's learning how to chill out, all right? So I'm going to end the video here. Definitely let me know what you think about it in the comments below. As always, I love hearing everyone's different perspectives. But that's all for now. Until next time, keep creating, everyone, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.